good, is it? Right. Struggle to prop this up. There we go. I'll start talking shortly. I'll just give you all a chance to get yourselves logged on. Hopefully you can hear what's going on. And right, give us a clue if you can hear me, and we're all there, and I'll start talking about that sheet very, very shortly. Just getting my stream up now so I can see that it's working. Perfect. Oh. Okay, so to prepare for this, what you should have done is got on that first page of the Anglo Saxons and Norman England, and I'll describe the features. And I'm going to talk you through what I would do in each of those questions. Hopefully you've had a little chance to think and maybe write down a few bits of your own ideas before we get cracking. So very quickly through each one, here we go. Describe 2 features of the rebellions of the North, 1069. Okay, the first thing that you could write about there is that both of those rebellions of the North attacked York. That was the focal point of the rebellions. That would be one thing that you could put. You describe, and in the second of those rebellions, they actually managed to take the castle at York. Another feature of the Northern rebellions is every time William turned up, I say every time, both times William himself turned up, the rebels ran away. So guerrilla warfare, that sort of thing. And you could also put that both of the rebellions of the North were led by Edgar the Athelin. There you go. There's 3. You only need to put 2 in the exam. That's the thing. These are very quick questions. Moving on to the next one. Describe 2 features of the Revolt of the Earls. Well, the big one for this one is it was the first, in fact, the only rebellion during William's reign that was not done by English people. This was the descendants of men who had come across the Channel with William. So it was being rebelled against by people who, who you'd expect maybe would support him. And a similar feature to that was, unlike the other rebellions, William didn't go and deal with it himself. He left his regents to do it. There's a key word for you. The word regent is whoever you leave in charge of a country whilst you're not in it. And because William was often out of the country, he had to rule with regents. So he left his regents there to deal with it. And in this case, it was his half-brother, Bishop Odo, and Lanfranc, the Archbishop of Canterbury. They dealt with the rebellion. So yeah, the Revolt of the Earls, that's that one ticked off. 2 features of Norman government. Well, you'd probably stick the Witan in there. I assume you'd know what the Witan is. The council of mostly earls, but also archbishops, bishops, key features from basically important people. Good word for important people. You can have this for listening. Magnates. Okay, so the key magnates in the land, it just means powerful, important people, all would gather to advise the king. The Witan didn't have actually, only Norman government. I am completely wrong. Ignore what I've said. This is why you've always got to read the exam question. Features of Norman government, well, one that's common to both that you can definitely have is sheriffs or shire reeves. Again, because William was out of the country so much, he needed to be able to rule, and he needed to make sure his instructions were followed out. The sheriffs were crucial for that. So one feature of Norman government were the sheriffs, who were supposed to enforce the law and the taxes in the shires around the country for William, especially because he was often out of the country. Another feature of Norman government linked to that is you could write about the chancery, or chancellery, should I say, which was crucial again because the sheriffs were so crucial. In the chancellery, they would write out all those instructions and the laws and the taxes that would then be sent by a messenger to the sheriffs. So that could be a crucial feature of Norman government at the time. And I've already mentioned regents. All of this connect. The use of regents was an important feature of Norman government because William was not there so often. He was in Normandy. In fact, here's the key word for you, another. So we've had magnates, very powerful people. This time, absentee monarch. If you're away from school, you're absent. If you're a king, or a queen, I suppose, if you're a monarch in charge of a country and you're very rarely there, you can be known as an absentee monarch, which is what William was. So in this context, I would be writing, because William was an absentee monarch, the use of regents was very important in terms of the Norman government of England. Two features of earldoms. Now, that's a tricky one. The easy bit would be to say there were four main earldoms in England under the Anglo Saxons: Mercia, Northumbria, Wessex, East Anglia. And you could maybe mention who was in charge of them if you knew. But I think just saying that there were four main earldoms and naming them would be enough to get 2 marks out of 4. The next bit's more difficult. But what you could say is that because these earldoms were so vast, well, it's here in the book. If you've got a revision guide, you've got them there. They were not able to, the earls themselves were not able to tax and punish crimes in their lands all themselves. So the lands were divided into shires. And across the country, there are about 40 shires or counties. So the earldoms were all divided up. And of course, as I've said, the shires were, well, they had a sheriff in charge of each shire to make sure things would be carried out, taxes and laws. So that's a common thing across the Normans and Anglo-Saxons. 2 features of William's troops. Well, probably just go cavalry, and got described. So there were cavalry in William's troops, which were crucial for running down and killing any Saxons that left the hill after the feigned retreat. And then archers, which were similarly important because it is very possible that Harold Godwinson famously was killed by an arrow to the eye. We'll never know if he was or not, but that's certainly a possibility. Features of towns. Now this would link to the economy. So describe 2 features of towns in Anglo-Saxon England. In the towns, you would have more of an exchange economy, where people were not living just with the things that they grew, but you'd have people swapping the exchange. What exchange is? Swapping things for other things. Might be money, might be anything. So one feature of towns is there would be an exchange economy in play. Another feature would there would be a lot of artisans. That's a good word. People, skilled craftsmen, if you like. People who could be blacksmiths, people who could make clothes, people who could make shoes. I'm thinking of very clothing-related things here. But people who had specialist jobs, they would go to the town so that people from the villages around, they could travel to the town to there. And that's another one. Because people from around would travel to those towns, markets were a feature of towns. A very, very important feature of towns for everybody involved, because people from the villages around, if they'd been lucky enough to grow a bit extra, or maybe if they're lucky enough to have a skill to make something extra, it would be to the towns that they would go to try to trade that, again, either with money or trade it for other things. 2 features of the Witan. 1, they were there to advise the king. The king did not have to listen to the Witan, they were merely there to advise. But the most important job, the second thing that the Witan had, their biggest responsibility, is if the old king died and there was some, a succession crisis, then it would be up to the Witan to choose who the next king would be. So there's 2. Advise, choose the next king. 2 features of the Doomsday Book. Right, well, the Doomsday Book would lay out who owned each bit of land to try to settle land disputes. That's really useful. The second thing, very useful for William, is it would list the wealth in that area of land. And many historians suggest that this was so William knew exactly how much he could tax around the country in different areas. So yeah, who owned the land, how much wealth was in the land. Describe 2 features of the social system of Anglo-Saxon England. Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to jump to a page because you might recognise this sort of set out. If I can find such a page, there it is. You might recognise this from the textbook. And I'm telling you, this is the social system. So you got the king, you got the earls, you got the thanes, you got the churls. That's not describing. That's just saying what they were. That'll give you 2 marks out of 4. But if you describe 2 points, well, we've talked about the earls before and the earldoms, and they're in charge of stopping rebellions in their area, enforcing the law, making sure taxes are collected, and you could also talk about the slaves. That's another feature of the social system of Anglo-Saxon England. Famously, of course, the Normans got rid of the slave section, but yes, slaves, which you could say, they had no rights, they were bought and sold, they owned no property, they got no wages. So there we go. And then it looks like for some reason I've repeated a question down the bottom there on the page, describing 2 features of earldoms. So there we go. There's a few bits of... You hopefully just saw, and I saw as I was going through it, that a lot of things I said could actually go in more than one answer. And this is it, you see. You might look at these exam booklets and think it's overwhelming that there's so many different questions to know the answers to. But really, when it comes down to it, it does intermingle, it does cross over. Hopefully when you get towards the exams, if you look over these booklets, you'll find from your revision, you do know a lot of answers to a lot of things. The skill, though, and this is where these exam books are crucial, are in making sure you work out which bit goes in each specific question. So there we go for me. So for those described questions, you only need to write a very short amount. These are very short questions. You only need 2 points described to get your marks in there. Now, as with always, if there's any specific requests of things for me to go over, then I will. So you just drop me an email or see me in the corridor and say, "Sir, I'm really stuck with this," and I'll go over something with you in next week's YouTube Live. Intervention after school on Monday tomorrow, of course, which you're welcome to attend. And if nobody does make a request, I will just go through another page from the exam revision book. And if you're wondering which page, your teachers will probably tell you, and I will stick it on the YouTube Live website for revision. And that's that. Okay, have a good Sunday night. See ya. Unless any questions, said. Second, if there's no questions, say, "Nah, thanks, sir. See you later." And then I'll go. Okay, well, I'll assume from that. There we go. Perfect. Hope it was useful. Let me know. See you later.